The Georgia Public Policy Foundation proudly presents the 1995 Georgia Freedom Award Dinner. The Georgia Public Policy Foundation is helping to shape a brighter future by promoting the time-honored principles of limited government and individual responsibilities. We are pleased to have you join us in honoring Judge Griffin Bell, our nation's 72nd Attorney General. A strong advocate for ethics in government, Judge Griffin Bell has dedicated his life and career to the legal profession. Integrity, fairness, and courage describe Judge Bell as a highly respected national leader. We now present this year's dinner with honored guest speakers, former U.S. Senator Herman Talmadge and former Congressman Bo Callaway.
We've got a very fascinating and a very unique program, probably one of the most unique programs that you have ever attended or ever will attend again. Our honoree is a distinguished American, not just a distinguished Georgian. And our two special guests are also distinguished Americans, not just distinguished Georgians. But they're also Georgia legends, and in their own right, they've all made a positive impact on the state of Georgia and on the United States. They've contributed in many ways individually to the betterment of our society. In their lifetimes, they've made history. In their lifetimes, they've each made positive contributions that have made life better for you, and life better for me, and life better for our children. I guess in some respects, we could actually label tonight's program Back to the Political Future. Bo and his wife, Beth, reside in Pine Mountain. They moved there in September of 1993, or I should say they moved back there in September of 1993. Bo is the chairman and CEO of the Ida Case and Callaway Foundation. And you all know the foundation, you all know Callaway Gardens. They returned there from Colorado, where since 1970, Bo has also served as either the president or the chairman of Crested Butte Mountain Resort. Bo graduated from West Point. He served as an Army officer in Korea during the Korean conflict. And he was elected to Congress in Georgia's old 3rd Congressional District in 1964 as a Republican. That was unheard of at the time in the state of Georgia. Then in 1966, he was the Republican nominee for governor of the state of Georgia, and he won the election. But he didn't win a majority. He won a plurality because of a write-in vote. So the election went to the Georgia legislature, and it was predominantly Democratic, and they refused to acknowledge that he won the election, and they gave the election to the Democrat. Sometimes I think about how politics might have been different in Georgia had Bo Callaway actually been sworn in as governor of Georgia in January of 1967. He went on from there to serve as Secretary of the Army. He then did something that not many of us get to do. He became a political force in another state. He went to Colorado with his ski resort, if you will. But he didn't go there just to make money. He did public service too. And he became very involved in the Republican Party of Colorado. And so he has made his mark politically, not only in Georgia, but in the state of Colorado. He's a civic leader. He's a professional leader. He's a political leader. But since I have been 16 years old, Bo Callaway has been one of my personal heroes. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you a great American, Bo Callaway.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tom. Boy, for that day in America 30 years ago, you sure made up for it tonight. Thank you. That never had a better introduction. I'm just delighted to be here. When Tom called me and asked me if I would come, I said, of course I would like to come. I would like to be with this great organization. And obviously I would like to be here to pay tribute to Griffin Bell. Anytime I have a chance to be with Griffin Bell, it's a good day. And I'm just delighted to be here. I was also asked to speak for a moment or two on the difference in politics between today and those days 30 years ago. Incidentally, Americus is in Sumter County, where my great-grandmother lived for 105 years without, to my knowledge, ever leaving Sumter County. And so I have some great respect for Americus High School and the people of Americus. 30 years ago, politics was a little different. We had a one-party state. As everybody knows, nobody ran for anything except in Democratic primaries, and winning the Democratic primary was what they called tantamount to election, and a lot of people would go around the country and said, what do you do? Well, I'm trying to stop the tantamount. And didn't seem to work. There was always, the tantamount was there. Just to give you an idea of Georgia 30 years ago, not long ago, we have 159 counties, 158 100% Republican. Fannin County never seceded, so Fannin County sort of stayed Republican. 158 were 100% Democrat, I meant to say. 158 counties, 100% Democrat. 158 Democrat sheriffs, 158 Democrat clerks, 158 Democrat ordinaries. It was a Democratic state. There had not been a congressman or a senator elected since Reconstruction, almost 100 years. And it was my thought at that time that a two-party system would be important. I still feel that way. Let me tell you the difference today. We're almost approaching a one-party state from the other direction, from a Republican direction. I live in Harris County. John White he used to live in Harris County there with me. And it's a rural county, truly rural. Back in 30 years ago, the few Republicans we had were around the suburbs of the major cities, maybe one or two legislators. That was all that was there that was Republican. Nothing rurally. Today in Harris County, at the last election we had, we re-elected a Republican member of the General Assembly for Harris County without opposition. We elected a Republican state senator without opposition. We elected a Republican congressman by a landslide in the most rural part of Georgia. We've come a long way. As we all know, we now have 8 out of 11 congressmen who are Republican. And in many ways, we're going on to develop a Republican state. The only place we don't have it now is in local elections, but we're beginning to get those as time goes on. We're contesting many, many of those. As a partisan Republican, you would think I must be extremely pleased to have, particularly in Congress, which I think is so important, to have 8 out of 11 Republicans. And I am. It's exciting. It's sort of a part of a life's work that I feel very good about. And yet, you know, there's some things about that I really don't like. We have 8 out of 11 Republicans in Georgia, to some measure because we have designed districts to give 8 out of 11 Republicans. And you know what we ought to be doing is having competitive districts. When I was chairman of the Colorado Republican Party in 1980, when we had the redistricting going on there, I came up with an idea. There were 6 congressional seats, and I said it would be very easy in Colorado to get 6 competitive congressional seats where every year you have an election, and there'd be 6 elections where you had a chance, Democrat or Republican, anyone had a chance, they'd be competitive. Because Colorado is just a 50-50 state, half Democrats, half Republicans. You could do that quite easily. I submitted a plan as my plan to do that. That did not happen. We went to the courts who finally did the redistricting, and what do you suppose they did? They protected incumbents. They gave the Democrats 3, they gave Republicans 3, and said that's fair. What is fair about saying to the people of Colorado that for 10 years you will never have an election? I could tell you for 10 years who's going to win every seat. The Republicans are going to win these 3, the Democrats are going to win these 3, and that has happened. We're getting that way. I think you're probably going to find for the next 10 years you're going to have 8 Republicans and 3 Democrats, no matter who runs. So in effect, why have elections? Why not just say don't have elections for the next 10 years? And what a wonderful thing it would be, and Pierre, you can do something about this. What a wonderful thing it would do, the next redistricting we have, we say, don't look after incumbents, don't look after Republicans, don't look after Democrats. Let's get districts that have a fairness and representation that are congenial from the district, and let's try to make them as competitive as they can be. And let the Republicans take their chance and let the Democrats take their chance, and not build districts that are entirely for one party or the other. I think that will be great, and I hope the time that comes that will come to do that. Well, that's so much of what I am to say about politics. I could talk a lot about my friend Newt Gingrich, who is from this county here, Cobb County, of course. And I guess the only thing I would say about Newt is, if he really does stay the course, and there's some question about that, he will, but I mean, if his whole Congress can stay the course, I think there's a chance to show to the American people that people who are elected on a platform and do what they say they're going to do are respected by the American people. I think there's a chance that you will see the kind of people who are representing a less burdensome government, a more chance for individuals to handle their own life for the next 20, 30 years, to have a much more influence on the government than they have had. And so that's why I'm hoping he will stay that course. If he ever deviates from it, he'll be just like everybody else. And there's no way that Republicans can compete with Democrats if you're trying to see who can do more with the government money. Democrats are just better at that than Republicans. But the reason I'm really here tonight is to say a word about Griffin Bell. I've got a lot of Democrat friends. As anyone who's ever served in any office knows, that no matter what your party is and what your partisanship is, you make a lot of friends in the other party. And I've got a lot of good Democrat friends. And I'm very proud to be a friend of Griffin Bell. I've been a friend for a long time. He's had an illustrious career. I first knew him when he was at King Spalding as an outstanding attorney before going on to be appointed to the Circuit Court of Appeals as a federal judge. We all knew him as Attorney General, where in the Carter administration, Griffin Bell was the one you called whenever you wanted anything done, because you know that Griffin would understand your problems and Griffin could get it done, whether it was in his place or not. And today, Griffin Bell, back at King and Spalding, takes on the most important law cases, the most prestigious, the most public of anybody in America. Who is picked by George Bush to represent George Bush personally? Griffin Bell. Who is picked to represent term limits? The states are doing term limits throughout the country? Griffin Bell. And I'll make a prediction. To the surprise of 99% of the news media, to the surprise of 75% of you here, the Supreme Court in the next month or two is going to rule in favor of the states being able to put term limits on federal office. And if they don't, it'll be because they didn't listen to Griffin. You know, all of us in any business, I think, like to be called by flattering terms. If you're a politician, you like to be called a public servant. If you're a businessman, you like to be called maybe an entrepreneur or something of that kind. If you're a newspaper editor, you like to be called as objective. If you're a senator, you like to be called a statesman. If you're a bureaucrat, you like to be called responsive. If you're from the IRS, you like to be called helpful. But what would a lawyer want to be called? Gosh, an attorney, that doesn't help any. And I can't think of anything a lawyer would want to be called, but what would a lawyer like to have and be known for? I think it would be common sense. Griffin is the essence of common sense. Everyone that knows Griffin knows that Griffin is Mr. Common Sense. During the Carter administration, everybody would say, you know, you can call Griffin. He's got common sense. And you could, and he did, and he would give you advice that would work. It's very uncommon to have common sense. I'll even be partisan and say that during the Carter administration, it was very uncommon to find people with common sense. And Griffin could always be called. I think the essence of Griffin Bell is always common sense. I had a personal experience with Griffin. Griffin was on the Circuit Court of Appeals in 1966. He was a member of the three-judge panel that decided whether the the General Assembly could take the governorship away from the person who got the most votes. I had a personal interest in that. Griffin led the three-judge panel to a unanimous decision saying no, they could not take it away from the man that had most votes, and I've always thought that was a very common-sense solution. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court, who had at least some of their members who voted by party line rather than Griffin's common sense, voted 5-4 to change that. But I've always had a great deal of respect for Griffin's soundness in that particular case. I've got a great deal of respect for Griffin because he serves on the board of Callaway Gardens. We've got a very prestigious board of Callaway Gardens, some of the people you know that are as prestigious as they can be, and none of them listen to me, none of them listen to anybody else except they listen to Griffin. So I can just sort of talk to Griffin a little bit about what's going on, and I sit back and everything works fine. I don't have to say anything. It's a great thrill and pleasure to have Griffin on our board at Callaway Gardens. I think he does a great service, and I think you'll see the gardens prosper in the years ahead, thanks in some large measure to Griffin. I wish I had known Griffin better through all the years than I have. I've not seen him as often as I would like. But I have never, ever been with him when my day was not enriched by being with him, when I did not feel better by being with him, when I did not learn something by being with him. And I think for a man who has earned the right to play golf and hunt quail like he likes to have him still continue to be on the forefront of so many important major projects in America is a great tribute to him, a tribute to our state, and a tribute to our country. I'm proud to be here tonight to honor Griffin Bell.
Thank you very much, Bo. It's a real pleasure for me now to introduce another man who is a Georgia legend, who needs no introduction. I could just say his first name, and everybody would know who I'm talking about. And how many people have you known in your life that you could just say their first name and 600 people would know exactly who you're talking about? Herman Talmadge. He was first elected to the governor's office in contradiction to Bo Callaway not being given the governor's office because he was elected by the people. Bo Callaway was not given the office by the legislature. Herman Talmadge's political career in the governor's office began by being elected by the Georgia legislature. We have so much history in this room here tonight. His father had died, had been elected governor, had died before he was sworn in. Herman Talmadge was elected by the legislature. He served 67 days, I believe. Then he resigned because the Georgia Supreme Court said that he could not continue in that position. He was then elected by the voters in 1948 to fulfill his father's unexpired term. Then he was reelected in 1950 to a full term as governor of the state of Georgia. He then was elected to the United States Senate in November of 1956, and he served until January of 1981. Senator Talmadge and his wife Linda, who is also with us tonight, they live on Lake Talmadge in Hampton. I guess it would be fair to say that more than any other Georgian who is living or any other Georgian that you can remember in history, more Georgians across the complete age spectrum know this man by name and by sight than anybody else that has lived or held office or been in any other profession in the state of Georgia. My grandparents swore by Herman Talmadge. My great-grandparents, I was told, did too. My parents always actively supported Herman Talmadge. My children, who are 9 and 13, can tell you as much about Herman Talmadge as I can. And I have always admired this man. I think the world of him, and I'm honored to have had the opportunity while I was working in state government to work with Senator Herman Talmadge and his staff, and I could talk for hours about the things that he and his staff did to try to help the governor be a better governor and serve the state of Georgia, and he never asked for credit for it. It is my personal pleasure to introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen, someone who there will never be another one like him, former governor, former United States Senator Herman Talmadge.
Chairman Perdue, Lieutenant Governor Howard, and other distinguished guests. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom, thank you very much for that warm and generous introduction. Several years ago, due to advance in years, physical and mental deformities, I quit making public appearances. But when I was invited to help honor Griffin Bell this afternoon, I could not decline this evening. I could not decline your invitation. I have enjoyed very much the last few years serving as an elder statesman. You know what an elder statesman is. That's an unemployed politician. They're entitled to give gratuitous advice, which no one ever accepts. I have also had plenty of time to read, hunt, fish, and draw my 2 welfare checks. It's called Senate retirement and Social Security. But in fact, both of them are welfare because neither is funded, and practically all of it comes from taxpayers' money. Like many things, both good and bad, originate in California. This new type of politics originated in California. I read a book written by one of them about 25 years ago. He had a fellow named Mulligan that came to see him running for either the city commission or the county commission of Los Angeles. I've forgotten which. In any event, there were several million votes involved. This man sized up Mulligan right off the bat as a complete fool. But he was either greedy or needed money or both. So he took Mulligan's case. He sent Mulligan out of town. For the duration of the campaign, Mulligan never made a speech, never held a press conference, never shook a hand, never had a press interview. For all practical purposes, he might as well have been dead. The theme of the campaign was 3 cheers for Mulligan. Mulligan not only got elected, but he topped the ticket. Oh, that's the difference between what it is now and what you and I ran for public office. You'd have to meet on the courthouse square, look people in the eye, fight off hecklers. They could judge whether you were an imbecile or whether or not you had any sense. But today, anyone that can raise money and can read a 20-second slogan on an idiot board and doesn't look like he's a fugitive from an insane asylum can become a very formidable candidate. We learned during the New Deal days, more than 50 years ago, that it was possible to buy votes with tax money. All congressmen since that time have seemed to practice that sort of statesmanship. We have now had more than 25 years without a balanced budget. They keep adding new programs, all Congresses except the recent one, that put more people to receiving federal checks. It's gotten to the point now where about 50% of the American people receive some sort of check from the federal government. The other 50% pay the taxes. First thing I learned on a farm was if you overload the wagon, you'll break it down. We've just about overloaded it now. I used to be opposed to term limits because I knew that experience was the best possible teacher. It takes a freshman congressman and a freshman senator about one term to learn their way to the bathroom. But the big trouble is they learn their job too well. They find out that if they can use public money to buy votes, it'll get them reelected to public office. And the reason we have had over 25 years of unbalanced budgets is because congressmen and senators have number one objective is to get reelected. And they can't afford to offend voters. I sometimes think if someone during recent years had offered an amendment to pay pensions to knock-kneed people, it probably would have passed because no one wanted to offend the knock-kneed vote. The reason I'm for term limits is because if someone cannot seek re-election, he's bound to vote for the country's welfare occasionally instead of his own welfare. Now, I first knew Griffin Bell almost 50 years ago. We've been friends since that time. I heard a story they tell around King and Spalding about the time they invited Griffin to come in and interview for a relationship with King Spalding. And Griffin wanted to know what the office rent was. He wanted to see the books and did see the books. So I don't know who was interviewing who under that circumstance. Looks like Griffin Bell was interviewing King Spalding instead of the other way around. Now, Griffin was an honor graduate of Mercer University. He serves as chairman of the Board of Trustees there today. He's been an outstanding member of King Spalding, one of the most prestigious law firms for more than 25 years. He served on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals with great distinction for some 15 years. And one of his accomplishments when he was on the Court of Appeals was to let lawyers talk less. He put through a rule that if there was no need for an oral argument, they wouldn't have them. All the other Court of Appeals in the United States have adopted a similar rule. He's the only man I ever know that could slow down lawyers from talking. One of the greatest things that Griffin ever did was to persuade Ernie Vandiver to set up the Sibley Commission. You know, in those days, the most controversial issue in Georgia was desegregation. We'd had segregation ever since the country was founded, had it embedded in our law and in our Constitution. Supreme Court suddenly changed it, and the people of the South were furious about the Supreme Court changing something that had been in existence for that long. The legislature passed a law that if schools were desegregated, they'd be abolished. We'd go to a private school system. The Sibley Commission held hearings in every congressional district. For the first time, people realized the gravity of the situation. And that Sibley Commission hearings, which Griffin Bell authored, probably saved the public school system in our state. He served as Attorney General during the Carter years, and probably the most nonpartisan Attorney General of my lifetime. He called the shots as he saw them, regardless of partisan politics. Griffin has always assumed civic responsibility on the local, state, and federal level. To sum it all up, Griffin has courage, which we don't have in the Congress. He has brains, which is a scarce commodity. He has character. He has judgment, and he has industry. He's a hard worker. He's made a great public servant, great judge, a great lawyer, and I congratulate you on giving him this significant honor this evening.
You honor us with your presence here tonight, Senator Talmadge. I know you came here to honor your good friend Griffin Bell, but you do us all an honor by being here tonight, and we thank you very much. I'd like to ask Hank McCamish if he would now come forward and take us into the next part of the program. And if you're wondering why I have not introduced the Bell family, they are all here. They're going to be introduced to you shortly in a different way. Hank McCamish, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Tom. I want to personally thank each of you here tonight for your support of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. I know, though, that your primary reason for being here is to honor Judge Bell. But I do hope that in some way you will leave with a little better understanding and a little more interest in the Georgia Public Policy Foundation and the work we're doing. As Tom said, we need your help. We appreciate everything that you're doing. And what you do, you help the people of Georgia when you help yourself. Senator Talmadge, Congressman Callaway, we deeply appreciate your sharing the personal remarks about Judge Bell. And as a follow-up to your personal remarks, we've prepared a short video. Mayor just said, "Oh no." And what we would like to do now is through the video is give you a glimpse of Judge Bell, and I think you will find it extremely interesting, informative. And those of you who are facing need to turn around, the video screen is to my right, back in the corner, and you will see Judge Bell in a different light.
Well, if you grew up in a rural area of South Georgia, one of the principal topics of conversation is public service. And when I was younger, I had an aspiration to run for office, but I never got around to it, and I always ended up doing other things, being in politics, but not as somebody running for elected office. So all my life I've had an interest in the political system. From the time I was a small boy, I wanted to be a lawyer because my father talked to me a lot about it, took me to the courthouse and left me up there to watch these arguments. Well, I had the worst military career of anybody. I spent 4 years worrying because I wasn't overseas. One time I even had Congressman Pace trying to get me overseas, and he finally wrote me a letter, either called me and said that if he said anything more to the Defense Department, they were going to send me to Alaska. So he said, "You might want your welcome out on this transferring."
We met during the war, right next door to where I lived at the time, at a party. Within the year, we were married, which was 52 years ago. We're exact opposites, as you can tell. Having him in my life has been good for me.
He is the person who goes out of his way to stay in touch with us. He's the person that makes the effort to do so many things. I remember in high school that when I played football here in Atlanta, no matter where he was and as busy as he was, he would always make sure that he got home for those Friday night football games. And not only that, after the game, and I'd go out with the girlfriend or the boys or whatever, that he would wait up for me, and I'd get home about midnight or 12:30, and we would talk over the game at the end of the day. Dad and I have had a lot of spirited discussions, debates, arguments, etc. through the years, but it doesn't bother us. We have stimulating conversations at the table that I learned from him, whereas a newcomer sitting at the table would probably be horrified.
It's pretty intimidating.
Or put off by it.
You usually just sit there and wait for a second that you might be able to say one thing, and you plan it and try to make it as short as possible because you know that you'll be cut off very quickly and won't get to finish a paragraph, maybe not even a sentence.
He's always considered himself a real authority on the Constitution. He made the top grades on that. In law school, he passed the bar after 5 quarters, which is quite an accomplishment. He was probably the most qualified person who ever became the Attorney General of the United States. He was chosen to be the campaign manager for Kennedy in the state of Georgia. And then in addition to that, all that, he was a federal judge for 14 years, and a federal judge not doing mundane things, but in the most, probably one of the most important times in our American history, and that is the Civil Rights era in the South. He's a great believer of people and getting together and working out their differences. He's a great person to get them together and mediate. He would literally use the chambers of the federal judge in a particular town, bring the parties together in the suit, say the school superintendent and the school board. He'd sit them down and say, "All right, Mr. Marshall, I want you to go to the front door. I want you to lock it. I want you to stand by the door, and you're not to let anybody out of this room until these parties have resolved their differences." And then he'd sit down and say, "Now, don't you think we ought to get started?"
Good.
And people would have trouble even looking back at it today and deciding whether that was, for example, a liberal thing that he did or a conservative thing that he did. And I think it was really in his mind neither. It was a practical approach to avoid a very hard situation.
He was appointed chairman of the Atlanta Crime Commission, and he got the job done well under budget and got it done in like 8 or 9 months.
I have selected, and the Senate has now confirmed, a man who will not just be an adequate Attorney General, but who will be a great Attorney General. I noticed in my engineering computations that he got 78% of the votes in the Senate. I only got a little over 50% as president.
People had lost respect for the Department of Justice. And indeed, people were referring to it in the 70s as a Department of Injustice.
Bell, a 58-year-old Atlanta lawyer, former federal judge, and longtime friend of Mr. Carter, becomes the nation's 72nd Attorney General. Mr. Carter ordered the doors at the main entrance of the department to be reopened for the first time since the Vietnam demonstrations in 1970.
We think this is a symbolic gesture of the way we're going to operate the Justice Department. Open door policy, and we're coming out from behind the barricades. We don't need to be behind locked doors.
We had planned to be there 2 years, if I recall, that the judge told the president. But it ended up almost 3 years. And I think he thoroughly enjoyed every minute he was there. He really did.
He became managing partner of this law firm in the 1950s at a very early age. He left to go on the federal bench in 1961, and then he came back in 76 for less than a year and once again began to play an important role in the firm, and then became Attorney General. Everyone was glad to see him come back in 79, and he then became very actively involved once again in the management of the law firm, and served at various times as chairman of the management committee.
Judge Bell's motto was follow, follow, or get out of the firm. He was very authoritative, and you know, his way was the right way.
You know, Griffin is a very fair person. People just can't help but like him and respect him, even when they strongly disagree with him on occasions. And I've been with him on occasions when other lawyers would really take strong disagreement with what he said, but they would always walk out as friends.
I don't have a mean streak in me. I never hate anybody. I've got that, my father was like that. He would always try to help somebody. I think I got it maybe from him, so I don't ever try to hate anybody. And even if you have to make a hard decision against someone, on an employment basis or something like that, I always try to do it in a way where you preserve your dignity.
Judge Bell's greatest strengths are his just native intelligence, his common sense, his extraordinary energy. At 76 years old, he can outwork and outthink just about any lawyer in our firm.
He's often seen in a coat and tie, and I've always thought that he only had about 3 outfits. One was the coat and tie, of course, his hunting outfit, and his golfing outfit.
Hunting and golf. And he really gets a great amount of enjoyment out of that. And it's a great way to be with friends. It's the only time he really gets to be with them, off with the boys, so to speak, I call it. Well, I did want you to include Missy on this because she and the judge are very close. They, from the day she was delivered to us, they bonded. And the most fun they have together is the judge will take her to the farm, and they will roam the fields and the woods for the whole day, and then once in a while they'll run into a covey, and Missy will retrieve for them.
Missy and Granddad each have a bowl of cereal together every morning. That's where his soft spot is when it comes to his dog.
As a golfer last year in a contest, he played 80 holes in one day. He was the leader of this charitable endeavor in which I guess more money was raised the more holes of golf you play. He played 80 holes and put all these younger people to bed, literally. They couldn't go to work.
They could not keep up with him.
Excitement and interest is always around Griffin. He breeds that.
We're going to do our very best to see that he never retires.
My dad places a great premium on character and integrity.
He takes sort of a common sense path to what is usually a very good solution.
You know, he really did work very, very hard for where he got.
But even as he's gotten older, and he's now 76, he continues to see visions like a young man.
The man would have made a great musician. It's a real shame.
I can't think of anything better than to be like Granddad.
I am very strong on public safety. I have an idea that our country will not be saved well if all the able people just devote their time to making money. So everyone ought to be thinking when they're young about doing public service. And I would give them the advice that they ought to face the hard questions. Politics is an honorable profession. What's wrong with Washington is that every congressman that's ever served, or anybody that's served in a high office like Attorney General, particularly if they're from a state with bad climate, they never leave. So I've always thought that we ought to have term limits. And if they haven't rendered their service in 12 years, it's unlikely that they're going to render any great service. The president ought to serve 6 years, no more than that, and not run for re-election. You would then divorce his political party from the White House, which is needed. And we can't play games any longer. We don't have that luxury anymore in this country. We're just talking about balancing the budget. We haven't got to the hard problem of paying the debt. President Roosevelt was a good man. The things he did, most of them were to get us out of the Depression. And the people that want to keep doing the same thing have not adjusted to the time. We've been out of the Depression a long time. Our government was going out of control. The fact that we won't balance the budget is a sign of sickness. But we have got to do something about balancing the budget, reducing the debt, eventually paying it off. We got to simplify our bureaucracies. We got to control the money. We got a very fine system of government, and we got the checks and balances, and it gets a little bit out of whack, but it sort of comes back together. I mean, we've got a great country. Senator Talmadge introduced me one time when I was Attorney General down here in Georgia somewhere, and he had he's got a sort of a caustic wit. And he said that he was proud to know me and that he and I were unique in Washington, that neither one of us ever spent any time in the state or federal penitentiary.
Barbara and I wish we could be with you to pay tribute to our esteemed friend, an outstanding Georgian, Judge Griffin Bell. When I think about Griffin Bell, I think about a man who has served his country with integrity, with decency, with honor, always with honor. Moreover, through his many contributions to his community, he's been what I call a point of light, helping to lift the lives of others, giving something back. Griff, we are very proud of you, proud to call you and Mary our friends, and we are prouder still to join in saluting you as you receive the prestigious 1995 Georgia Freedom Award. Congratulations. Well done, my friend.
Judge Bell, I've often heard you described as a great American, a dedicated Georgian, a brilliant lawyer, a man of compassion and caring, a devoted family man, and a fantastic grandfather. We all have benefited tremendously from your efforts and your many contributions to public service. And we thank you for your continuing efforts to make our state and our nation a better place for all of us, a better place for our children, a better place for our grandchildren. And Judge Bell, would you please join me at the podium to receive the award? On behalf of all the members of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, it's a great, great deal of personal pleasure for me to present to Judge Bell the 1995 Freedom Award. And I pray that God will continue to deeply bless you and your family. We love you and we're proud of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hank. This is a great honor and very proud to be associated with the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. We are, Bo and Herman and I all, I suppose, in the same generation. We're not everything we've done is in common, but in my own life, I was a product of the boll weevil revolution. My father had to leave the farm, and he really never got over it. All his life, he missed being a farmer. Griffin Jr.'s got a farm, and I told him once he was a throwback to his grandfather. But these people came and had to get by off the farm. I go back to Stewart County, which is over south of Columbus, where all my ancestors lived, and it's very sad because where there used to be hundreds of farms, there's nothing but pine trees. Where they had a lot of churches, the churches are gone. Even the cemeteries are hard to find. Most of them are not kept up. So we went through something like the Dark Ages and really didn't know it. So it's a sad thing to think about. But then we got into the Depression, so we had to learn what to do during the Depression. We were then in World War II, which was to put down the fascists, and that was a revolution. Then we lived for a long time, as most of you did, during the Cold War. We had the stalemate in Korea, but that was part of the Cold War. We lost the Vietnam War, but again, that was part of the overall picture, and we finally did win the Cold War. That was another hard experience for Americans. Then we had the Civil Rights Revolution. It was remarkable that we had such a revolution as the Civil Rights Movement, and we were able to do it within the structure and the strictures of the court system. It was a revolution, but it was a revolution in law. And it's a great tribute to our legal system that we were able to do that. I was sent to South Africa by the State Department in 1986 to study the court system and see if they could do the same thing in South Africa that we were able to do in the American South on our Constitution, enforce the rights of people under the Constitution. I had to report that they could not because they did not have a Constitution. At that time, the whites wished they had a Constitution as much as the blacks wanted one because they were suddenly without any protection at all. It seems to be working out well, but Civil Rights Revolution was really a remarkable thing, and I think in the history of governments. We're now in another revolution. We're in the revolution of the information age, and we're having a lot of corporate downsizing, all kinds of downsizing, because the information age is changing things. Everything has been downsized except the governments. The federal government, when I left the Justice Department as Attorney General, we had 54,000 people there in the whole department, all the different divisions. And I had, in the second year, cut the number by 1,200 and got it down to 54,000. I was at a speech at a meeting in Washington last year. Ms. Reno was speaking, and she was telling how hard it was to manage a department of 96,000 people. But it doesn't seem like it's been very long since I was there, and they've gone from 54,000 to 96,000. That gives you an idea of the downsizing. That's in government language, downsizing means to increase. It's the same as saying that if we reduce the amount of money we're getting extra every year, we've been cut. That's another. I never have understood how we get the same amount of money and even a little more, but we don't get 1 percentage point above the inflation rate. Somehow we're being cut. So all these things, you have to get used to the government language. I think that public policy is politics. If you don't understand politics, you're not going to have much to do with public policy. You can't control policy. You can't make anything better through policy. We've got some serious things on the national level. I know this this organization is dedicated to the state level problems, but on the national level, we're having something going on before our very eyes that needs to be brought under control. Last year, for the first time in history, we had 26 filibusters in the Senate. That means that you can't pass anything in the Senate unless you can get 60 votes so you can cut off the filibuster. That does away with the majority vote in the Senate effectively, and that's also all going already this year. We can't, we don't seem to be serious about a balanced budget. We ought to pay the debt off instead of just talking about balancing the budget in 2002. I've got a suggestion for people in Washington. Don't give us any tax cut. Take the money that you're going to give us and pay down the debt. Put the debt in a sinking fund, and every time you think you can cut taxes, just go over and pay something on the debt. That will cut the amount of money we're paying in interest, most of which go into foreigners. If the foreigners get tired of us, they think we're unstable, we're going to have a serious problem about even borrowing money, which is what we're doing. We live it on borrowed money. So that is a serious matter. I want to pledge my support to this organization any way I can do to help with policies. We have a great state. We don't have balanced budget problems in Georgia. We have not had since 10 years after the Civil War ended. When the Reconstruction ended, we put a provision in the Constitution that we have to have a balanced budget. The city of Atlanta has to have a balanced budget, so nothing unusual about that. But we've got a great state, and people often ask me when I'm going to retire, do you have any plans to retire? And I never really think too much about it, but I was thinking Justice Holmes, Oliver Wendell Holmes, was always a great hero of mine, and I was a boy when Roosevelt was elected president, and I remember reading about Roosevelt calling on Justice Holmes, who was at that time 93 years old. He had retired, and when Roosevelt got there, he was reading something in Greek, and Roosevelt said to him, why are you reading in Greek? He said, I'm trying to improve my mind, young man. And he was a famous man in that time, and he fought in the Union Army in the Civil War. He was a captain. He was wounded and decorated for bravery. And when Roosevelt called on him that day, it had been over 60 years since he was a captain in the Union Army. He said something, and this is why I'm mentioning this about Holmes. He said, they said to him, why didn't he retire? And he said, well, in a horse race, the horse can't stop just as soon as it crosses the line. There's a brief period that they call the canter. The horse canters. You slow down, but you don't quit. You can't quit at the finish line, and you don't quit if there's work to be done. I have found in my life that there's always some more work to be done. Maybe you don't do as much, but there's work there, and so you don't quit. We live in a great country. Dean Rusk, after he came back to Georgia, to Athens, to the University of Georgia, was beat up substantially by the media about the Vietnam War, and he had been a distinguished educator in other states, and the director of the Rockefeller Foundation as well. And he had trouble finding a job, and he came to the University of Georgia as a distinguished professor. And wherever anyone had asked him to speak, he would go. Small towns, make speeches. He said he thought he owed that to the people of Georgia. But he said one other thing. He said, I never make a speech where I don't end on saying something about how great our country is. What a privilege it is to live in a country like the United States. I feel the same way. I'm proud to be a Southerner. I'm proud still to be an American. Thank you for the award.
A very special thank you to the following for their extraordinary efforts to ensure the success of the 1995 Georgia Freedom Award dinner. The Bell family, the Honorable Herman Talmadge, the Honorable Bo Callaway, King and Spalding, Jack Barnett, T. Rogers Wade, Ann Davis.